Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a concept called the narrative edge, and we're going to look at mastering the art of persuasive storytelling. Let's get right into it.
So want to change someone's mind? Yeah, it sounds simple, right? But honestly, it is notoriously one of the toughest things to do in any human interaction. Think about it. Whether you're trying to sell a product, pitch some brilliant new initiative to your boss, or literally just trying to get your friends to agree on where to eat, convincing a skeptic is rough. You know the drill. You gather all your evidence, you organize your logic, you present this totally airtight case, and then what happens? Well, they push back. They find that one tiny little hole in your argument, and they just anchor themselves right there. The source material we're digging into today actually identifies this exact friction point, and it offers a radically different way to overcome that stubborn skepticism.
In the professional world, our default setting is what the text calls the data dump. Oh man, we've all been there, right? We've all dreaded it, just completely drowning our audience in statistics, bullet points, charts, and figures. We kind of trick ourselves into thinking, hey, if I just provide enough data, the sheer weight of it is going to force them to agree with me. But the text argues we need to shift entirely over to emotional resonance. We've got to stop dumping data and start actually striking a chord.
Okay, so if you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, let it be this core idea right here. Facts tell, but stories sell. The author explicitly states that all marketing, all persuasion, the whole shebang, really, ultimately boils down to telling stories. Seriously, if you want to sell more copies of a book, push more products, or elevate your services, you just have to become a storyteller. Because look, facts are basically just neutral pieces of information sitting on a table. They tell you what a thing is, but the story? The story is the engine that actually drives the sale, gets the agreement, or creates that big mind shift.
And when you use a good story instead of a dry fact, the text outlines 4 specific things that happen. First up, it moves people. It physically and emotionally shifts them from, apathy to actually caring. Second, it shares your passion. Look, you can't put passion in a spreadsheet, right? But you can absolutely weave it into a narrative. Third, it creates excitement. A good story has momentum. It has stakes. That builds serious anticipation. And fourth, and this is literally the holy grail of persuasion, it passes to friends. Nobody leaves a dinner party reciting your data dump. No way. But they will absolutely retell a compelling story you shared with them. Stories are just inherently viral.
Now, to actually pull this off, the author, John Kramer, introduces this really fundamental rule. We have to move away from abstract audiences. When we sit down to write a pitch, it's so easy to picture this faceless gray blob we call the target demographic, or management. But watch out for that trap. Abstract ideas and abstract audiences are the absolute enemies of good storytelling. You cannot connect with a demographic. You can only connect with a person.
To really hit this home, Kramer brings this vivid, honestly almost uncomfortable reality to the table. He says stories are always about people, real people. People with hearts that break, toast that burns, and lives that always seem somehow incomplete. I just absolutely love that imagery of the burnt toast. It's so wonderfully mundane, isn't it? Kramer's basically telling us that your audience isn't just some suit in a boardroom. It's a real person who maybe had a terrible commute, whose heart might be aching, or who literally just accidentally burnt their breakfast this morning. When you ground your narrative in that deeply human, highly relatable reality, boom, you instantly bridge the gap between you and the listener. You are suddenly speaking human to human, not vendor to consumer.
And really, that leads us to the ultimate purpose of your story. According to Kramer, because these real people have lives that seem, somehow incomplete, your goal is super simple. Your goal is to complete. Which, if you think about it, is a profound way to look at a pitch. You aren't asking them for a favor, you aren't begging them to buy your product. No, through your story, you are offering them the exact missing piece that resolves their tension, fixes their burnt toast, or heals a tiny part of their broken day. You are offering completion.
So let's ground all this theory in a massive real-world case study from the text. We are talking about Guy Kawasaki, the legendary Macintosh evangelist. Back in the early days of Apple, Kawasaki was tasked with getting software developers, and the general public really, to buy into a completely new, entirely unproven computing platform. Talk about tough. The stakes literally couldn't have been higher, and the skepticism was absolutely through the roof. Now, Kawasaki knew that if he relied purely on computer specs, he'd lose. Period. If he just went out there and talked about RAM, processor speeds, graphical outputs, well, he'd just be inviting a debate with IBM loyalists. So what did he do? He completely abandoned the data dump. Instead, he focused entirely on empowering creatives. Kawasaki notes that he told stories. He told stories about how the Mac empowered people to design, to write, and to innovate in ways they absolutely never could before.
He was painting a picture of a transformed life, not just a faster machine. So why was Kawasaki's approach so wildly successful? Well, the source text points to the ultimate benefit of this narrative edge, bypassing skepticism altogether. Think about skepticism like a literal firewall in your audience's brain. When you present facts, that firewall immediately scans them for errors, actively looking for reasons to reject the data. But a story? A story doesn't trigger the firewall. It slips right past those defenses, mainly because it doesn't present itself as an argument to be dismantled. It presents itself as an experience to be shared.
The psychology behind this is honestly pretty simple. Stories are not something people argue with, they are something people feel. Just let that sink in for a second. You can argue with a price point. You can totally argue with a feature list. But if I tell you a story about a frustrated graphic designer who finally found joy in their work because of a new tool, well, you can't argue with that designer's joy. You can only feel it. You've essentially moved the battleground from the logical brain, where you can easily lose, to the emotional heart, where you can actually win.
So how do we synthesize all of this into your very next presentation? The final, absolutely crucial step from our source material is simple. You have to make the audience see themselves in the story. Seriously, whether you're pitching a revolutionary tech product to a massive crowd, or you're just sitting across a desk trying to convince your boss to greenlight a new project, the narrative has to act as a mirror. The boss needs to see their own stress being relieved in your story. The customer needs to see their own burnt toast being prevented by your product. Because if they don't see their own reflection in the narrative, it's just a fairy tale. But if they do see themselves, it becomes a roadmap to their own completion.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. Next time you pitch, next time the pressure is totally on and you desperately need to change a mind, what is your default going to be? Are you going to fall back into that trap of the data dump, just hoping that an avalanche of facts will somehow win the day? Or are you going to take the narrative edge? Will you remember the burnt toast, bypass all their skepticism, and tell a story that they can actually feel? The choice is totally yours, but as the text reminds us, facts only tell, it's the stories that actually sell. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.